Hi again, Horizons. We are on to chapters 10 and 11 right now. Chapter 10 is titled Money Trouble. Louis was the best liked young male swan on Upper Red Rock Lake. He was also the best equipped. He not only had a slate and a chalk pencil around his neck, he had a brass trumpet on a red cord. The young females were beginning to notice him because he looked entirely different from the others. He stood out in a crowd. None of the others carried anything with them. Louis was delighted with the new trumpet. All day, the first day he had it, he tried to get it to make a noise. Holding the trumpet was not easy. He tried several different positions, but bending his neck and blowing. At first, no sound came out. He blew harder and harder, puffing out his cheeks and getting red in the face. This is going to be tough, he thought. But then he discovered that by holding his tongue in a certain way, he could get the trumpet to emit a small gasping sound. It wasn't a very pretty noise, but at least it was a noise. It sounded a little like hot air escaping from a radiator. Poof! Went the trumpet. Louis kept at it. Finally, on the second day of trying, he got it to play a note, a clear note. Ooh, went the trumpet. Louis's heart skipped a beat when he heard it. A duck swimming nearby stopped to listen. Ooh, went the trumpet. It will take time, thought Louis. I'm not going to be a trumpeter in a day, that's for sure. But Rome wasn't built in a day, and I'm going to learn to blow this horn if it takes me all summer. Louis had other problems besides learning the trumpet. For one thing, he knew that his trumpet wasn't paid for. It had been stolen. He didn't like that at all. For another thing, Serena, the swan he was in love with, had gone away. She had left the lakes with several other young swans and had flown north to the Snake River. Louis was afraid he might never see her again, so he found himself with a broken heart, a stolen trumpet, and no one to give him any lessons. Whenever Louis was in trouble, his thoughts turned to Sam Beaver. Sam had helped him before. Perhaps he could help him again. Besides, springtime was making him restless. He felt an urge to leave the lakes and fly somewhere. So he took off one morning and headed straight for the Bar Nothing Ranch in the sweet grass country where Sam lived. Flying was not as easy as it had once been. If you've ever tried to fly with a trumpet dangling from your neck and a slate flapping in the wind and a chalk pencil bouncing around at the end of its string, you know how hard it can be. Louis realized that there were advantages in traveling light and not having too many possessions clinging to you. Nevertheless, he was a strong flyer, and the slate and the chalk pencil and the trumpet were important to him. When he reached the ranch where Sam lived, he circled once, then glided back and walked into the barn. He found Sam grooming his pony. "Well, look who's here," said Sam. "You look like a traveling salesman with all that stuff around your neck. I'm glad to see you." Louis propped the slate up against the pony stall. "I'm in trouble," he wrote. "What's the matter?" asked Sam. "And where did you get that trumpet?" "That's the trouble," Louis wrote. "My father stole it. He gave it to me because I have no voice. The trumpet hasn't been paid for." Sam whistled through his teeth. Then he led the pony into a stall, tied him, came out, and sat down on a bale of hay. For a while, he just stared at the bird. Finally, he said, "You've got a money problem, but that's not unusual. Almost everybody has a money problem. What you need is a job. Then you can save your earnings, and when you get enough money saved up, your father can pay back the man he stole the trumpet from. Can you actually play that thing?" Louis nodded. He raised the trumpet to his beak. "Ooh," said the trumpet. The pony jumped. "Hey," said Sam, "that's pretty good. Do you know any other notes?" Louis shook his head. "I've got an idea," said Sam. "I have a job this summer as a junior counselor at a boys' camp in Ontario. That's in Canada. I'll bet I can get you a job as camp bugler if you can learn a few more notes. The camp wants somebody that can blow a horn. The idea is that you blow a lot of loud, fast noises in the early morning to wake the boys up. That's called revel. Then you'll blow some other notes to call the campers to their meals. That's called the mess call. Then at night, when everyone is in bed and the light has faded from the sky and the lake is calm and the mosquitoes are busy in the tents biting the boys and the boys are getting sleepy in their beds, you blow some other notes, very soft and sweet and sad. That's called taps. Do you want to go to camp with me and try it?" "I'll try anything," wrote Louis. "I am desperate for money." Sam chuckled. "Okay," he said. "Camp opens in about 3 weeks. That'll give you time to learn the bugle calls. I'll buy you a music book that tells you what the notes are. And Sam did. He found a book of trumpet calls such as they use in the army. He read the instructions to Louis. Stand erect. Always hold the trumpet straight from the body. Do not point it down towards the ground, as this position cramps the lungs and gives the performer a very poor appearance. The instrument should be cleaned once a week to remove this spit. Every afternoon, when the guests on Mr. Beaver's ranch had gone off on pack trips in the hills, Louis practiced the calls. Pretty soon, he could play revival, mess call, and taps. He particularly liked the sound of taps. Louis was musically inclined and was eager to become a really good trumpeter. A trumpeter Swan, he thought, should blow a good trumpet. He liked the idea of getting a job, too, and earning money. He was just the right age for going to work. He was almost 2 years old. On the night before they were leaving to camp, Sam packed all his camping things in a duffel bag. He packed sneakers and moccasins. He packed jerseys that said Camp Couscous on the front. He rolled his camera in a towel and packed that. He packed his fishing rod, his toothbrush, his comb and brush, his sweater, his poncho, and his tennis racket. He packed a pad and pencils and postage stamps and a first aid kit and a book that told how to identify birds. Before he went to bed, he opened his diary and wrote, "Tomorrow is the last day of June. Pop is going to drive Louie and me to Camp Couscous. I bet it will be the only boys' camp in the world that has a trumpeter Swan for the camp bugler. I like having a job. I wish I knew what I was going to be when I am a man. Why does a dog always stretch when he wakes up?" Sam closed his diary, shoved it into the duffel bag with the rest of his stuff, got into bed, turned out the lights, and lay there wondering why a dog always stretches when it wakes up. In 2 minutes, he was asleep. Louis out in the barn had gone to sleep long ago. Bright and early next morning, Louis arranged his slate and his chalk pencil and his trumpet neatly around his neck and climbed into the back seat of Mr. Beaver's car. The car was a convertible, so Mr. Beaver put the top down. Sam got in the front with his father. Louis stood tall and white and handsome in the back seat. Mrs. Beaver kissed Sam goodbye. She told him to be a good boy and to take care of himself and not to drown in the lakes and not to get into fights with the other boys and not to go out in the rain and get sopping wet and then sit around in the chilly air without putting a sweater on. Not to get lost in the woods, not to eat too much candy and drink too much pop, not to forget to write letters home every few days, and not to go out in a canoe when it was windy on the lake. Sam promised. "Okay," cried Mr. Beaver, "off we go to Ontario, beneath the open sky." The car tooted and he started the car and tooted the horn. "Goodbye, Mom," called Sam. "Goodbye, son," called his mother. The car sped away toward the big main gate of the ranch. Just as it was disappearing from view, Louis turned round in his seat and put his trumpet to his mouth. "Coo!" he blew. The sound carried, a wild, clear, stirring call. Everybody back at the ranch heard it and was thrilled by the sound of the trumpet. It was like no other sound they had ever heard. It reminded them of all the wild and wonderful things and places they had ever known. Sunsets and moonrises and mountain peaks and valleys and lonely streams and deep woods. "Coo!" called Louis. The sound of the trumpet died away. The ranchers returned to their breakfast. Louis, on his way to his first job, felt as excited as he had felt on the day he learned to fly. All right, we're about to start chapter 11. They have arrived at camp. We'll see what they get up to there. Camp Couscous was on a small lake, deep in the woods of Ontario. There were no summer cottages on the lake, no outboard motors, no roads with cars rushing by. It was a wilderness lake, just right for the boys. Mr. Beaver left Sam and Louie at the end of a dirt road, and they finished their journey to camp by canoe. Sam sat in the stern and paddled. Louie stood in the bow and looked straight ahead. The camp consisted of a big log cabin where everybody ate, 7 tents where the boys and the counselors slept, a dock out front, and a privy out back. The woods closed in all around, but there was a bare spot that had been made into a tennis court, and there were plenty of canoes in which to take trips to other lakes. There were about 40 boys. When Sam's canoe grounded on the sandy beach next to the camp dock, Louis stepped ashore wearing his slate. his chalk pencil, and his trumpet. About 20 boys rushed down to the landing to see what was going on. They could hardly believe their eyes. "Hey, look what's here," one of the boys yells. "A bird," cried another. "Look at the size of him." Everybody crowded around Louie, wanting to get a close look at the new camper. Sam had to push some of the boys back to keep Louie from getting crushed. "Take it easy, will you?" Sam implored. That evening, after supper, the director of the camp, Mr. Brickle, built a big campfire in front of the main lodge. The boys gathered around. They sang songs and toasted marshmallows and swatted mosquitoes. Sometimes you couldn't understand the words of a song because the boys sang with marshmallows in their mouths. Louie did not join the group. He stood by himself at a little distance. After a while, Mr. Brickle rose to his feet and addressed the boys and counselors. "I call your attention," he said, "to a new camper in our midst, Louie the Swan. He is a trumpeter swan, a rare bird, and we are lucky to have him. I have employed him at the same salary I pay my junior counselors, $100 for the season. He is gentle and has a speech defect. He came here from Montana with Sam Beaver. Louie is a musician. Like most musicians, he is in need of money. He will wake you at daybreak with his trumpet. He will call you to meals, and at night when you are dropping off to sleep, he will play taps. And that will bring the day to a close. I caution you to treat him as an equal and to treat him with respect. He packs a terrific wallop with one of those wings. I now introduce, for your listening pleasure, Louie the Swan. Take a bow, Louie." Louie was embarrassed, but he came forward and bowed. Then he raised his trumpet to his mouth, and he blew. When he finished, from the opposite shores of the lake, there came an echo. The boys clapped. Louie bowed again. Sam Beaver, sitting with the others, his mouth full of marshmallows, was delighted that his plan had succeeded. At the end of the summer, Louie would have $100. A boy named Applegate Skinner stood up. "Mr. Brickle," he said, "what about me? I don't care for birds. I've never liked birds." "Okay, Applegate," said Brickle. "You don't have to like birds. If that's the way you feel, just go ahead not liking birds. Everyone is entitled to his dislikes and likes and to his prejudices. Come to think of it, I don't care for pistachio ice cream. I don't know why I don't like it, but I don't. Do not forget, however, that Louie is one of your counselors. Whether you like him or not, he must be treated with respect." One of the new boys who had never been to camp before stood up. "Mr. Brickle," he said, "why is this camp called Camp Couscous? What does that mean?" "It's an Indian name for the great horned owl," replied Mr. Brickle. The new boy thought about this for a minute. "Then why didn't you just call it Camp Great Horned Owl?" "Because," Mr. Brickle replied, "a boys' camp should have a peculiar name. Otherwise, it doesn't sound interesting. Couscous is a terrific name. It is a long word, but it has only 3 letters in it. It has 2 S's, 3 K's, and 6 O's. You don't find many names as kooky as that. The queerer the name, the better the camp. Anyway, welcome to camp. It rhymes with moose. That's another good thing about it. And now it's time for everybody to go to bed. You may take a swim before breakfast tomorrow, and you don't need to wear your swim trunks. Just jump out of bed when you hear the trumpet of the swan. Strip off your pajamas, race to the dock, and dive in. I will be there ahead of you to do my celebrated backflip from the diving tower. It freshens me up for the hard day ahead. Good night, Louie. Good night, Sam. Good night, Applegate. Good night, all." The light was fading. The boys straggled off to their tents in the darkness. The senior counselors sat together on the porch and smoked one last pipe. Sam crawled in under his blankets in tent 3. Louie walked to a high, flat rock by the shore and stood there waiting. When the lights were all out, he faced the camp, raised his horn to his mouth, and blew his taps. Day is done, gone the sun. From the lake, from the hills, from the sky. All is well, safely rest. God is right. The last note seemed to linger on the still waters of the lake. From their beds, the boys heard the beautiful sound. They felt sleepy and serene and happy. All but Applegate Skinner, who didn't care for birds at bedtime, but even Applegate was soon asleep, along with the others in his tent. He was asleep and he was snoring. People who dislike birds often snore. A deep peace fell over camp. that is the end of chapter 11. I hope that you all enjoyed it. Excited to see what happens in chapter 12, and enjoy the rest of your summer at Horizons. Bye.